All right. Thank you so much for joining us today at RG Podcast. Good to be back with you, Scott. Actually, you haven't been on in about 4 months because I haven't been on in about 4 months. So it's nice getting back in the game. Unfortunately, life, or I should say, fortunately, life comes into play, and you got other obligations to do. But definitely is nice being back. So thank you for joining me tonight or
Oh yeah,
tonight,
man.
today here.
Yep. Nice to be on, brother.
Actually, before we start, I just would like to take a moment of silence in remembrance of Austin Metcalf. So, if you are a religious person, you might want to say a prayer. If you're a non-religious atheist, just send out some positive messages to the family. So, okay. Well, that being said, Scott, you recently plagiarized my idea for this podcast on your own podcast when I mentioned I wanted to do this one. So I'm just curious if you could just before we get started with this topic, if you could just tell me how that conversation went down and if you learned anything from it.
Yeah, we started talking about the situation surrounding the uh the incident and kind of recapping it and heard a few words from Patrick Yardnell, Sophia, Alex, everybody that was up there, and got a little perspective on it. And that's pretty much what we did, when we wanted to have a really fair and balanced view of it and not really, you know, be taking
Mhm.
sides just yet because we don't have all the
Right,
information,
right. Yeah, that's exactly what I want to do as far as this conversation goes. But did you learn anything, or maybe change your ideas on anything, or did you double down on what you believe?
Well, what I believe is kind of neutral. So I'm still neutral
Hmm.
until I get all the information. I just think that the man should have his day in court and they should investigate and really, people should really stop being so divisive and
Right.
be more and really just have more compassion for both families because in a way they both fathers and mothers they lost the son,
Oh,
both of them.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, these kind of situations, like, there's absolutely no winners, because let's just assume, for example, that this young man was able to get off with this, with found not guilty. You still have to live with the regret, or the literal blood on your hands of having taken a life. One, two, is that just the other consequences that are going to come about as a result of that. Not just to your family, you have that to your family, but then you also have just potential job prospects, or being doxxed later on. There's a lot of other stuff that are, you know potential revenge, having to live with that on your mind. So yeah, I'd say there's losers all around with this one. There's no winners. But okay, there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about. But first off, just, you probably are watching this a little bit closer than I am. So could you kind of just give the general details in like a 1 minute, what went down?
Sure. So there was a track meet in Texas, in Frisco, Texas, and it was inclement weather, so they had a delay. So they had tents set up for each side on in the bleachers for each team. And when it was raining, from what I understand, Carmelo entered the tent of who Austin and Metcalf and his brother were at, along with other people, of course. And they wanted him out of the tent, obviously, and it became kind of argumentative, from what I understand. And he pretty much told him that we don't want I don't want any problems. Touch me and you're going to find out. Punch me and you're going to find out. You're going to mess around and find
Also,
out what's going to happen, whatever. And something happened. Somebody put their hands on, I think, obviously, Metcalf put his hands on Carmelo, and then he jabbed him in the heart with the knife and ran out. And that's what happened. And then the police found him out in the bleachers sitting around somewhere and took him into custody. He didn't deny that he didn't do it, so we know he did it, and that's as far as we know. And we have witness testimony, of course, too, as well.
The Christian version of that is fool around and find out, or fornicate around and find out. That the consequences, like, getting the consequences of your actions. So that's yeah. I mean, people always say that they're FAFO, but this is like an extreme version of that, because I mean, it is that, but it's like you never imagine. Let's just say, for example, I can very well assume that that young man might have the young man that got stabbed might have thought, hey, the worst case scenario is, I slug it out with this guy. Like, he couldn't possibly imagine that this would be the last argument he ever got in. And I do want to say, actually, today is my birthday in America. It's not here in South Korea. We're a day ahead.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. But it's also the 17th anniversary of my mom dying. And she passed away that day on my birthday. But the thing is that I was thinking, like, why exactly we celebrate a birthday. One, there is obviously the entrance to this world that we can celebrate, but there's also the element of surviving another year, another rotation of the earth around the sun. And the thing is that we never know when our last birthday is going to be. That's, no one celebrates their birthday thinking this is my last year alive. And I think that just these little situations like this should give us some pause to kind of hold our child a little bit tighter that day, because we take life for granted so frequently. But, just really quick, though, I do want to point something out, is that I do want to frame this as this conversation is being compassionate, but you yourself do have a black son, correct?
Yes.
Can you tell me about you have several kids with it?
Yes, I have my son. He just went to a prom last night, so
Wow.
he's about to graduate. And then and I have a daughter. She's going to turn 23 in July, and they both live in California with mom. And yeah, we're close. They come to visit me every year. I love my kids. I couldn't imagine being without them. I couldn't imagine
Yeah, I
anything
know.
like this happening.
Right.
As
I said, it's an all around tragedy. Yeah, it's horrific. I mean, when I think about this, I lost a cousin who was 18 years old, and they didn't even get to live a third, no, maybe a fourth or fifth of their life they could have potentially lived. And so this guy's, no kids, no grandkids, no marriage, no anything like that. It's yeah, can't even say how much the family might be struggling with that. But okay, so you have a black um child, or several, and I do want to frame something, because when you start having these conversations, people already start thinking that they know where you're coming from, or they can assume something else after they've heard something else that you've said. So I don't like Hitchens, although we share the same birthday, but he had an interesting quote, was that if you could infer a third thing about someone after knowing two things about them, then that's a very boring person. And so I just do want to say that, like, I grew up with half black cousins and half white cousins and half Japanese cousins. So just growing up, I got exposed to a lot of diversity. And so I do, because some of the stuff probably I'm going to say is going to come off as sounding as like anti-black or anti just a certain mentality. But I say this as a Latino. I can say a lot of these things as a Latino who grew up raised with blacks and whites, going to school with them, and understanding there's a ghetto, and it's not just for blacks, because it's a ghetto mentality that can exist with Latinos or just poor people in general, that like there's a way you handle a perceived disrespect, a slight, right? Like on the streets, there's like the legal justice and there's like a street justice. As you were talking about FO, fool around and find out, there's a way you respond to a certain way. And I don't know, you probably experienced some of that, like being a white guy. I think you told me a bit about that. Can you kind of just so we can give a proper framing of this?
Yeah. So, when I was coming up as a kid in school, at the really formative years, when you're around 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, is a really formative time for teenagers. And at that time, I was going to an all black school, and I was considered like a very, some people thought I was a mixed guy. Some people thought it just took me as a white kid. And, I had to face a lot of racism, and it was just kids being kids. I didn't really, later on, I looked at it like, it's just kids being kids. But at the time, I felt really attacked for my skin color, because back then in the 80s, it was a big divide in the black community as far as light skin versus dark skinned people, not just white versus black, because some people thought that I was, something else, oddly enough, because my brother was black and we went to the same school. And so, Roots would come on once a year. I'd get chased from school. I'd run from school. I got beat up too much. And so I had to really do a lot of physical fighting and, taking up for myself, sticking up for myself just around that. And it was like, just if they saw you flinching, you were done. Like, like you were saying earlier, if you're in the hood where I was, we lived pretty much in the hood at the time. And I went to an all black poor school. And if you folded your hands like that, people would laugh at you because they thought you were scared. And I would always do that. That was my thing, to feel safe. When someone confronted me, I'd go like that, and they'd be like, "Oh man, he's a punk!" Pow, hit you in the face. Yeah. So yeah, it's like you said. There's a way to handle confrontation when you're, in the hood like that. As a young man.
Yeah. So you got a couple of quotes coming in from Sophie here about the area, but how do I really say this? Okay. So there's also something we need to frame too, is that young people tend to lack impulse control. Actually tend to. They really lack impulse control. Like a lot of stuff that I think that I've done as it's around that same age, like I wouldn't even think about doing anymore. You kind of gone down that route as an older grandfather now, like me, and you kind of realize that there are certain things you just don't want to mess around in life. And even if you're right about a situation, what it might cost you to get that victory is not worth the effort. It's sometimes better just walk away from a situation, especially with relationships. You know what I mean? I learned this a long time ago, is that you could either be right or you could be at peace. And so like sometimes ideally you would love to be able to have both of those. In a perfect world, you could be both right and have peace. So it's like I've learned at this stage of my life, but again, I'm a 40-year-old guy. I'm a 40-year-old guy who's learned you don't always have to respond back. Oh my God, this has been one of the last lessons I've ever learned, is that you don't need to, just because you're right about a situation doesn't mean you got to try to win the argument with someone. You know what I mean? The amount of time and effort you can put into winning that argument is not going to be worth this little small W that you get. Sometimes best to just walk away. And with you have relationships, a lot of people don't really get this, is that you can't keep tallying scores for who needs to do what, and holding on to stuff that happened 2-3 years ago. You gotta, I've learned this very on in marriage. You have to try to let what happened yesterday, just leave it in the past and focus on the day right now. You can't let 1,000 yesterdays get stacked up on you today. So, but again, these guys are really young, and there's this automatic assumption that people jump to in a situation like this, that there's a race element to it. And I'm not saying necessarily that there's not, because there might be, but to just say this is a racially motivated attack, you really do not know that. I mean, it could just be you have two young people who have a bad ratio of balls to brains, and stuff just goes down. Like it's a perfect storm mixes brews. You know what I mean? And so I think we still need more details, but I think just I don't know. How do you stop yourself from jumping to assumptions in this? I want to ask you that.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at the background. Like Sophia had brought up the point that, he was a well to do kid, lived in the suburbs, Frisco, Texas, two-parent home. He doesn't really fit the stereotypical violent black male. In fact, he had a history of helping people,
Hmm.
saved a person. And so he didn't really, so this was sort of like, something new for him. He was probably scared, and he was underweight. He was like only 130 pounds. Here you got these beefy 200-pound football stars coming to grab you. He probably was just scared for his life. So I don't think it was necessarily a street thing or a cultural thing. I think in this case, he was just scared out of his mind. On the other hand, though, our culture is bombarded with negative messaging anyways. The rap
Right.
music today, the all the negative stereotypes that are being perpetuated makes people feel like they have to fit that narrative too. Like, oh, you're not a real, like my son is a light-skinned black kid. And at the time they started shipping the kids in from not Oakland, from Compton. And he was going to school in Orange County, which was mainly Asian and white. And he was like,
Woot woot.
yeah.
Represent
And
Asia.
so yeah, and so when the Compton kids came in, they gravitated towards my son because he was like the only black kid there. But they were like laughing at him. They're like, man, you're not a real N word. Look at your nose. You ain't got a N nose. You got a white person nose. Look at you. You got nice hair. Blah blah blah. And they picked on him. And so it was a whole different sort of situation going on. You know what I mean? And
Right.
so yeah, it really matters a lot what kind of background you come from. That determines a lot.
Right. Actually, you were talking about forces at play, and in your other podcast, I saw that, and yeah, you have messaging, a lot of messaging that winds up going on in people's, people's subconscious, and even their conscious as well. Because when you're constantly being bombarded, that there's this race war that's out there, and there's just, I mean, if you went by from what a lot of people say, you would think that there's just racial attacks every week, um, by the thousands, and if obviously they exist, you know what I mean? Like, this isn't the same way as like domestic violence exists, but a lot of domestic violence takes place within the realms of, uh, you know, um, people most likely marry their own race. And so you have violence that's taking place interracially inside of your own race, and that is just, we can easily see that and say there, we can chalk this up to some kind of dysfunction that's taking place, addiction, trauma, and there's no racial element to that. It's just dysfunction that exists amongst people. And so I think in a situation like this, understanding, if someone is walking around with a knife on them, uh, regardless of what happened before or after that, like that's an issue right there. People, one, needing to even feel that you need to do that in the first place, you know, being feeling unsafe. There's that. And then two is that there's an environment of violence that's taking place in America, be it from the riots that have taken place in the past, uh, just having so many school shootings in the back of your mind. There's a just culture of violence that goes down there, and I can tell you this: it is so strange it is so strange for me, living in South Korea, because one of the things that they do is that if you get assaulted here, even if you fight back, just say you fight back the other guy, you can still get charged with assault here. So what does that mean? Like, how does that practically play out? Is that people just don't fight each other. Like,
Mhm.
you rarely even see fights, because also you can get sued. Like, if you just punch somebody, you're gonna have to pay them like $5,000, And if you cause them more damage, you have to pay more, pick up 10, 20,000. So the way that they handle, there's just really small tolerance for that here. And as a result, you don't see stabbing. Well, there's no guns here to even shoot people with, unless you're counting North Korea, of course. But I got killed on a K drama last year. And in
Mhm.
this K drama, I was playing a typical Mexican thug, but selling some guns. But this whole drama is about guns start appearing in South Korea, and then the police have to go and investigate where they're coming from. And here in South Korea, that's fiction. Like, this is just total fiction. The idea that people would have guns and start killing people, just doesn't even exist here. So I think part of this can be fixed with laws, as I said, with the way that they do it here in South Korea, as far as the charging both sides in violent situations, to where people just like, hey, this is not worth it, man. It's not worth it to put hands on each other. But then the other part is there's a cultural element of this as well. You're talking about the music. What are your thoughts on, like, I see the way I see it, and you know this. You've already seen some of the music I'm producing, but I've decided I'm going to put positive music, positive vibes out into the universe, because I really think that a lot of this stuff gets like inside of your brain, and it's hard to get out of it. Whatever you're talking about violence and drugs, and
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I mean, that's why we both do our shows, for example. We um we want to put positive messages out. We want to unify people together,
Right.
and be a more cohesive society. And yeah, we have a culture in America, as you know, that prides itself on guns and the right to stand your ground in certain states, and you know self-defense. You have the right to defend yourself, which all really sounds good and it sounds reasonable. But at the same time, it is the more moral thing to do would be to um for no one to shoot anybody, of course, right? And the way to get
Hmm.
to that, like, I lived in Europe, I lived in Germany. They didn't have guns. No citizens really had guns. Now some people can make the argument that, I understand that positive messaging, and it's positive not to have guns, and we shouldn't shoot each other and this and that. But some people don't trust the government, and so they want to have guns so that they can protect themselves against
Hmm.
powers, foreign and domestic. And so that's the whole reason for the Constitution. And so our culture is very embedded in violence at this point because of that. And then, well, another point I wanted to kind of bring up, which is kind of related, is that if you're a hammer, you're going to see everything as a nail, right?
Right.
So, just like I've oftentimes said, like on the left, they throw their people overboard once they get their votes. Once they get their support, they tend to throw their people overboard and do what they want. That's been the criticism from the other side. But now that side, the right, we've had more conservative black voices in support of MAGA than ever before.
Hmm. Hmm.
A lot of conservative voices, and now a lot of conservative voices are standing in unison with the messaging of Malcolm X, and of course, in this case, applying that to it would say that, hey, you've got to defend yourself, from whatever, if it's racism or whatever. You have the right to defend yourself. But now that conservative messaging is sort of overpowered by the racism that seems to be inherent with that, because you got to understand the narrative is, the black culture is weak on family, weak on morals. They have all these inner problems with their culture, and a lot of black conservative voices were in support of that. And so the white side of the conservatives were applauding that. Hey, we've
Right,
got black people waking up. But now
right.
that this situation happened, they're willing to attack black conservative voices because they would rather hold on to, the narrative of black people are weak, as far as morals, as far as ethics, as far as behaviors, and these sort of things, without even looking at the situation. And that's the whole
Uh,
point.
I'm just curious. Have you ever seen a movie called Bamboozled by it's by Spike Lee,
Spike Lee. Yep.
and it has a not Denzel, Damon Wayans. Damon Wayans.
Hmm.
By the way, just funny story. I was at Michael Jordan camp. My sister sent me to Michael Jordan camp whenever I was like 13 years old, graduating, going to middle school, and Damon Wayans' son was there, so I got to get the one who's like an actor now. So I got to take a picture with him and his dad and stuff. That was back in the day when I used to have a six pack. So that was a long time ago. But anyway, moving on. But anyway,
You've got a
so
different six pack now.
six pack of rolls. Actually, I got more like a keg going on here. Keg.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a irrelevant point. Moving on past that. But uh so that one of the premises of that movie is that the Damon Wayans character. I want to give away any big spoilers, but he's trying to make this like TV show, and he's trying to write about just ordinary, average, middle class, like white. Oh, sorry, a black family who, like, I think they adopt an Asian kid, and the guy, his producer, is a white guy. Um, Rappaport, I think Michael Rappaport, is that his name?
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think he's either married to a black woman, or he's just really into black culture, because you could really tell, like, with this movie, he was really on board with the messaging that they were going for, which is that the way blacks get portrayed, like, you'll never see, or I should say never, but your average middle class, just black family, or like, they're not portrayed very strongly on media. And like, if do you ever watch Family Feud?
Hmm.
I love watching Family Feud, because whenever you see the black families that go on there, you'll find people who are like super successful, and they're articulate, and they're logical, they're rational thinking, and when they start talking about, hey, what are you doing? They're like, hey, I'm a teacher, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer. Like, they're really middle class, really middle class, well-to-do type people. And the problem is, though, is like, you don't see a lot of that depiction on TV. Whenever you see black people, it's shit like Soul Train or Boys in the Hood, um, Soul Plane. I meant Soul Plane. Soul Train's not so bad, but Soul Plane, that movie, or it just really, really ghetto stuff that's constantly going out there. And I think, from my perspective, that is one of the most obviously, there's a lot of factors going on. That's that's just one side of it. Like, we would be remiss to not mention the importance of needing, like, stable families. That is, because when you and I were talking about school shootings, that was the number one thing that you said needs to be addressed, is broken families, not having a father figure there to teach you the importance of work, of ethics, morality, of conflict resolution.
Hmm.
Because when you see it depicted on, like, Boys in the Hood, someone disrespects you, what do? You go blast their asses. You know what I mean? You're listening to a Tupac song that's, I'm gonna stomp you, I'm gonna pistol whip you, stuff like that. So I think we need more positive messaging in this, not just amongst this community, but just in general, and a better depiction through the arts of shining lights, not just emphasizing the people who are rapping, or playing basketball. What
Hmm.
are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's a really good point, because a lot of the entertainment depicts black people as, all, they celebrate, you know, um, loose sexual
Right.
morals from women,
Promiscuity. Hmm.
promiscuity. Like, you see Sexy Red and, Stallion and all these people out here
Right.
on the
Right.
radio that are, you know, making really, filthy videos and
Then
music
you
and
got,
stuff like that.
and then you got Ludacris. He's got the hose and all the different area codes.
All
So
the different area codes, exactly. And so, and then the violence, they're always talking about busting a cap and somebody, killing the ops, taking the ops out,
the
all of
pistol
these
whipping.
really negative, yeah, all these negative sort of portrayals. Now, people can say, well, it's just like the movies, it goes back to that old, and then the free speech thing, um, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger can play the Terminator and kill as many people, have the highest body count in the movie industry as possible, and that's okay. You can have Goodfellas and Italian mobster
Hmm.
movies and all of that, and that's all fine. But when black people do it, it used to be that, oh, you're trying to censor black people from depicting their reality. But now we've got this so-called woke culture that I know a lot of people hate that. It's become a derisive term.
The
But
cult of wokeism.
yeah, wokeism that sort of says that, hey, this is black culture. You're not allowed to criticize it. This is what they fought for. This is who they are. Um, who are you to judge them for this sort of messaging that they put out? And I think that's a bad message. I think we need to get back to family values,
Yeah.
get back to ethics. We just need to go about it the right way. And I think part of it is fostering two-parent homes,
Right.
bringing family values back into the consciousness of the
Ye-
world.
Yeah. So okay. So a few things I want to say. First of all, actually, Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't even kill that many people in the Terminator, because especially starting from part two, he doesn't even
Hmm.
like he doesn't even kill anyone. Like he's like, in fact, part two,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's true. He
does
was right.
he does kill the metal dude, but the son make John Connor makes him promise not to kill
Yeah,
anyone.
that's true. That was a good point.
But I anyway I do, that's a very valid point that you were talking about. Just because Terminator is like my favorite series of all time, um, but you were talking about, yeah, other depictions, and I do want to point something out too, because Michael Moore released a book called I think it's called Stupid White Men, and one of the parts he talks in there, he tries to give some kind of defense, and I think, to be honest to God, when the white people come in and try to be apologists for this kind of stuff, I think is one of the biggest disservices that they could do to the black community. Because what he says in there, this is just crazy. He says, "Oh yeah, well, there's been a long tradition of white people making songs about killing people," and he talked about Johnny. He specifically mentions Johnny Cash,
Hmm.
Folsom City, where he goes, you know, and I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. So
Hmm.
he quotes that one, and then he quotes like Bohemian Rhapsody, when the guy says, "Mama, I just killed a man," and he quotes those. He says, "Oh yeah, there's this long tradition of white people doing this," but no, that's not the point. Because yes, you could find stories of whites producing stuff like this, but what we're talking about with the music is pervasive violence. Like
Hmm.
every rap song or every rap CD, I should say, is going to have some kind of reference to either one of three things: selling and or using drugs or alcohol. Two, promiscuity, and three, violence. So yes, does that exist in white music? Yeah, absolutely. If you listen to country music, by the way, do you know what you get if you play country music backwards?
I can imagine a lot of things, but go right ahead.
You get sober, you get your dog back, you get your truck back, you get your wife back. But no,
Hmm.
you have similar themes of, like, sex. And I mean, you could listen to some Garth Brooks and songs, and he's making references to drinking, and you know what I mean, like having sex like he may not overtly say it, but he does. That does exist. I mean, I'm a country fan, so I know this exists. But then you balance that with there's a lot of positive messaging as well within country music. You know, there's whole stories that take. It's the only genre that really tells whole stories actively. And I know every genre can tell a story, but country music is the only one that's like it's pervasive, and there's
Yeah.
pervasive positive messaging about family, working hard, overcoming difficulties, and I don't see the equivalent of that coming out of the black community. And I would love to, I really would love to see that, you know,
And it's
when I see,
sad.
yeah,
It's really sad because in the 80s, like with the electro music and the early rap music, it was always positive. It was almost prophetic, like warning people about the evils that may visit upon the earth, society. Like Nucleus came out with computer world, push the button. Um, there's all these songs by Grandmaster Flash, The Message, by Melly Mel, and so many different songs. You got KRS-One that came out, Public Enemy. Um,
mm-hmm,
so many different rappers back then. They call it conscious rap,
mm-hmm.
and it still exists on the underground circuit. KRS-One still puts out music, and then
Really?
yeah, he
I didn't know
still
that.
puts out albums like every other year. And then you've got, you had other rappers that were mainly just competitive about rapping itself. They were just there to see who could say the flyest rhymes, and who had the best wordplay. And then somewhere along the way, I think when certain rappers came out, like Ice-T came out, and even though he was talking about a lot of street stuff, he would always have a positive message at the end. I'm telling you this story so to stay away from it. You don't want to be part of
Mm-mm.
this. But then
Wow, wow.
NWA came out and they sort of glamorized it, and they got rich off it, and they won their case with the government. And Two Live Crew came out in Florida, and they won their case, so that they could talk about and twerking, and
Hose.
the hose, and all this terrible rap music. It really ran the culture right in the ground, ran rap culture right into the ground. I mean, they just ran with it. And then all the kids coming up, they just gravitated to that. And now we have what we have today, which is just Two Live Crew and NWA on steroids every day with this drill
Yeah,
music and all of that
I
stuff.
know, right? Actually, it's called the Streisand effect, which is are you familiar with this?
Not really.
So the Barbara Streisand, ironically, they took a picture of her house to show the erosion of the coast, and she sued whoever took that picture because it included her house. And so as a result of that, pictures of her house wind up getting circulated all over the US. So it's the irony, they try to censor it and they made it more popular. And actually, the Nazi guy who we've interviewed on this podcast several times, he actually talks about being a guy from the Midwest, Michigan, and seeing Two Live Crew getting taken to court. And he's like, I don't even like rap, but I gotta go buy that album now, just because you're trying to censor this the way
Mm,
that they did it, the irony of that. And so like I'm not advocating against like I'm not advocating against free speech here, because I'm talking about more of like black people taking ownership and saying, yeah, are we free to produce and distribute this kind of music and movies?
hmm
Yes, but we're not going to do it though. Doesn't matter what you pay us. We have to understand that we are actively contributing to the downfall of our community for the sake of enriching ourselves. And you have someone like Eminem, I'm not Eminem, 50 Cent, who glorifies selling drugs as if like he's bragging about how many drugs he's selling. It's like that's not something you want to brag about, man. That's a product that sells itself. If you're selling like if you're selling something that's hard to sell, that's a crappy product that nobody wants to buy, and you can sell that and you brag about it, yeah, I'll hear you out. But man, come on,
Well,
crack cocaine.
KRS-One. Yeah, exactly. And KRS-One, he came out with a documentary and interviews talking about that. where he was saying, hip hop got sold out to capitalism.
Mm,
Even way back in the day, um, when Sugar Hill Records would only sign, artists that would fit in with the pop culture,
mm,
the very popular culture. They wouldn't really put out the positive messaging because it wasn't that popular until
mm,
it was, and then everybody was on it. But then this class of people were more than happy to sell out towards gangster rap. And
right,
so gangster rap was the next flavor of the month, and so they went with that. And then it's all about money, it's about capitalism. And so and capitalism has no moral foundation. It's not supposed to. It's just a system of supply and demand, and
right.
everything. And but the thing about that is, like you were saying, if the black community could put themselves above the money, if
Hmm.
they could look at the community, their people, they had more love for their people than the money that they can
Right,
make by exploiting their people, they would be
right.
so much better. And I believe that that's a product of, hundreds of years of, the slave trade, obviously. Um, the break, the and not, and even worse than that was when the black family was broken up for
Yeah.
entitlement and welfare and
Hmm.
things like that. And then the federal government sort of supported the dissemination of the black family. And so then it was more lucrative for a woman to have kids, not have a husband, and get
Hmm.
the welfare check and this and that. And that's really sad. I mean, it also affects the white community, but not so much as the black community. And and it's more highlighted. And so it's just, you really have to value, first of all, yourself as a person, and then your community, to make it better. You don't see this sort of things. And like with the African community, I was married to an African, and their culture is totally different than the black
Hmm.
American community. It's because the
Right,
culture is different.
right,
It's
right.
more cohesive, and we just looking at the product of the government splitting the black family up.
I mean, I genuinely wish that people would get a chance to see the level of communal mindedness and like civil duty that South Koreans have. There's like an there's just well, there's several concepts, but one of them is like saving face and doing like the honorable thing. Um, and for example, like for them, having kids out of the wedlock is 100% just not acceptable here. So they don't. The government doesn't endorse it or support it. So there's not a welfare state that exists here. And the other thing is too is that people just naturally, like, no one needs to tell them, hey, wait till you're financially stable and to where you have like a stable household to bring a child into the world. They just like naturally do it. They naturally want to save up money for their children's education here. That's another thing here. Like, families spend like, I swear this is not an exaggeration, man. They spend like an average of like $1,000 a month just on private education, like sending their kids to private schools here after school. And that's like on the lower end, man. There's people who spend like $2,000 a month on that and getting their kids private home. I do that now. Actually, I do home tutoring, but there's a level of responsibility that they have here that is just amazing. And even down to recycling stuff like that. They're just they think of the what's best for the community. And I think seriously Americans can learn so much from their mentality. But I do want to get this back to this young man, this situation, because I don't know. How would you advise somebody who's in the situation where there's a perceived slight that's taking place against you, how you could handle a situation like that? Because we could go on and on and on about root causes and stuff like that,
Hmm.
and get back to thousands of years of history. And I mean, we could go on and we could beat this dead horse, but like practically speaking, from right here, right now, like how do you handle a situation like that?
Like you probably know, my messaging is to pretty much kill the ego, to become unattached to things that feed the ego, things that you think that, the illusion of things you think that you need to aspire to. Then you kind of shield yourself away from the root causes we're talking about. If people can actually learn how to um, value themselves, kind of focus in on what their goals are, what are your dreams, what is it that you want out of life. And everybody pretty much wants the same thing. They just want peace of mind. um, they want that, but you can't have any of that if you're always being spoon fed by the matrix, the matrix being the society out here. But if you can, get unattached to all that, get unattached to the music, the messaging, the politics, the things of that nature, and at least spend a little time going inward and you know destroying your ego, you know seeing that we're all one thing, we're all one thing, we're all connected. Because look, what Carmelo didn't just hurt him, it's going to hurt
You're
Carmelo
right.
himself
And his
forever.
family too. His
He's got to
family.
live with that the rest of his life. Imagine he's killed somebody. That's going to weigh heavy on his conscience.
Hmm.
And it's going to not only did it affect the person who he killed, but his family, his friends, even his enemies. I mean, all of that stuff is connected. We're all connected. And if we can just kind of understand that in our private lives every day, if we can kind of meditate on that and see that for what it is, and then we think about, like, even now when I go out in the street to go to work every day, um, a situation can always hop off. I have to understand, how am I prepared to deal with it? Am I going to let my ego get in the way? Am I going to get mad because somebody flipped me off in the street driving down the road? Am I going to get mad at work because somebody's trying to throw me under the bus or whatever? Am I going to let my temper get the best of me because I have an ego to protect? Or am I
Right.
just going to know how to relax and focus on really the big picture? And that takes a lot of discipline, but it takes a
Hmm.
lot of practice to pattern, creating that pattern for yourself. So that's my advice.
That's really good. Actually, the other video you made about that you sent me, what was it?
Oh,
What
the
was the
mirror.
title? Yeah, what was
Oh,
the title of it?
oh yeah. So that's the collective unconscious,
Right. Okay.
and yeah, and the mirror system um, effect.
Yeah. Generally speaking, I don't endorse anything that Scott puts out, especially the quote unquote music you produce. But I have to say that was pretty good. Um, no, no, Sophia. No, I think I want to post that. We'll post. I want to post that in the comment section here. So I think that's a really good one. That people can, if you digest, turn just listen to it because your face is on there the entire time. So you want to get away from that, but audibly listen to it. You have some really good points in there. And the other thing too is I really liked what Sophia said about her mom teaching her to count to 1, 2, 3, take some deep breaths, and understand something, that whether or not you're 16 years old or you're 60 years old, is that, well, a couple of things. One is that our first reaction, our knee jerk response, is often not a good one. So do not trust your knee jerk responses in situations like that. Uh, Two is that, yeah, understand that whenever you're emotional or you feel like you've been slighted, that, or disrespected, quote unquote, or whatever it could be, is that the way that you're going to respond to that, as if immediately within the first like minute or so, it's probably going to be much different as if the way you would do that 60 minutes later. So I think sometimes you need to remove yourself out of a situation. That's a really helpful thing because as again, as if you're 16 years old, and I think these guys were 17, but anyway, just being a young guy is that like your impulse control is going to be much worse than you're a 60-year-old man like you. But we have to like take a step back and just remove yourself out of situation, do some breathing. I think that could be really helpful. But another thing too is that there's a Toltec book by Miguel Ruiz. I can't remember his whole name, but it's called The Four Agreements. And one of those agreements, I made a book, I made a song based on this book on the channel. I'll have to include that too in the chats here because it's positive messaging through the music. But one of those is about not taking things personally that other people do or say, because that's a reflection of them and not you. So whether or not they're being rude or they're being racist or whatever, you could let that get you down. You could let that ruin your day. But you just ultimately have to understand that whatever that person's doing and saying is a reflection of themselves. And it doesn't speak about you. It doesn't say anything about you. It says something to do about them. Because Dale Carnegie, he writes this about this story and how to win friends and influence people. And he talks about this lady sends him a message and she just reams him. I mean, she rips him a new one. And God, the way he responds, this is hilarious because at first he's like, all right, I'm going to get this lady back. I'm going to send her back. I'm going to retweet this lady back just as harsh. I'm going to burn this lady. And he's like, nah, you know what? He's like, one, he says, I thank God I wasn't married to this woman. He said, the first thing he did is just thank God I'm not married to this woman. And then the second thing he did was that to understand that whatever she was thinking or saying wasn't reflecting him. And it was a reflection of her and her own insecurities or whatever. And so I think in a situation that can be hard to do sometimes, but there's a lot of things you could do when you find yourself in this situation. One is just, as I said, remove yourself. Two, try to understand that they could be having a bad day themselves. Another song that I've made was about this quote is that if we could read the secret histories of our enemies, we would find enough pain and misery that it would disarm all of our hostility towards them. Let me repeat that. If we could read the secret histories of our enemies, we would find enough suffering and pain that it would disarm, take away our ability to be hostile towards them. And so just understand that people have baggage and everything that's going on in their lives. And they could be having a really bad day. And you might be the last domino on that.
That's right. And one of the things that has kind of worked for me a lot of times, I've avoided a lot of conflicts by being very proactive towards
Also,
a resolution. Like, say if
oh yeah,
you understand, like if you're at work or you're engaging with someone and you feel like it's a potential problem or it's kind of escalating, just do something different. Shock them with something like a handshake, or shock them with a hug, or shock them with something nice to say, instead of just reacting to their energy with the same energy. Kind of throw some new energy in there to kind of throw the whole situation off, throw it off into some different direction, because you have to be smart, you have to be wise and understand what's going down. And part of that is recognizing it when it's starting to go down. There's little signs, there's little flags you can tell when somebody's, when an argument or a situation is about to escalate. It, you feel it, you see it. And at that point, that's your opportunity to
de-escalate.
actually de-escalate the situation somehow. Tell a joke. I don't know what it is. Like, maybe if Karmelo could have handled it different and said, something positive as a reaction to the negative he was
Apologize.
getting. Apologize. make a joke. Well, it's kind of raining out there, and I was just trying not to melt. You know how black people, melt whatever, something.
Yeah.
Chocolate melts in your mouth, not in your hands. You know what they say, or
Oh,
whatever. Say
I'm a-
something funny to get out of the situation, to make it lighthearted. Bring some
yeah.
lighthearted, energy to that situation. If you can just be aware, and we're all aware when it's going down, we all know. But what happens is we'd rather take the risk and say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and take a risk and see if I can take a
Right.
W, and and see if my ego can come up better.
Right.
And that's just not wise.
And for me, it is so hard to project, to look into the camera with a straight face and try to project anything that I've learned from the 20 25 years since I graduated high school, and to really think that I could hold even an iota of the same standard. Because I mean, I think I was a total shithead in high school, as I think most of us are. But the thing is, yeah, talk about de-escalation, or but I think, because one of the things I've learned so strongly was that, like Dale Carnegie says, that any fool can try to justify their mistakes, and most fools do. But it takes someone of noble character to admit when you're wrong, and not just to admit that you're wrong, but to try to remedy whatever it is that you've done. You know, so
Mhm.
let's just say, like me, I've told you about my pre-Christ years, about being divorced from my wife, but also coming back here to South Korea and reunited with her, and but understanding that, like, I was in the wrong in this situation, and I'm trying to make it right now. And so if he would have said, yeah, exactly, he could have absolutely apologized in the moment and said, hey, I'm sorry, would you guys mind, maybe just give me 5 minutes, just so I could warm up a little bit, because it's harsh out there, whatever. I mean, he could have gone down that route. He could also have said, hey, thank you, and thank you for letting me stay here for this few minutes, and I'm gone. You guys have a nice game. There's also that could have went down, but unfortunately, the worst possible scenario that could have possibly went down did go down. And so I don't know, at that age, I'm not even sure if I would listen to myself at this stage of my life, like, seriously, because I know how arrogant I thought and how smart I thought I was at that age, to not listen to anybody, and to think I had everything figured out. And lo and behold, now 25 years later, I'm still figuring stuff out. And but one thing I definitely have learned is that, um, that if you are in the wrong, you're in the wrong. Just admit it and try to remedy as fast as possible. I think we've both had situations where you've called someone else out on something that they've done wrong, and then they just get pissed off about it, and it's obvious that they're in the wrong. And rather than just saying, hey, my apologies, that they want to make it worse, by you've already made one problem, now you're going to escalate and make it worse. So
Mhm.
I don't know. I do want to end off on something else, but, like, because I know you're wrong a lot of times. So how do you handle whenever you're wrong? Because I think this would be a good, because you're wrong most of the
Well,
time, but
yeah, I'm wrong all the time. I'm pretty
all the time.
sure about that, all the time, all the time. And when I recognize I'm wrong is the time to apologize, or the time to somehow remediate the situation. And the way I look at it is that we have to live this life, and when we are on our deathbed, or we're at the last throes of our life, we have to remember the kind of life we lived. And I don't want to be regretful. I want to think about every situation that I encountered, I handled it like a champ. That, even though I was wrong all the time, at least I tried my best, to work within that in the positive way. You know what I mean?
Scott, yeah,
Because,
that might be the only logical and rational thing I've ever heard you come out of your mouth, man. That
well,
was
thank you.
beautiful. That was
Thank you.
beautiful, dude. I love that. Please,
Awesome.
please continue,
Awesome.
sir.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me. I don't know. Do you ever watch these near-death experiences
I have. I've seen
videos?
quite a few. Yeah, yeah.
So, one of the common things that they always do is they have these life reviews. And
Mhm,
whatever
mhm,
your
mhm.
view is, whether you think it's a hallucination of your brain or whether you believe it's really real or whatever, it doesn't matter, because there's enough reporting on this to really think that it's possible you may be one of those people. They're going to have to review that stuff at the end of your life for whatever reason, whether it's a biological thing or not. Um, I don't want the last moments of my life regretting, like a lot of these people, a lot of these near death experiencers talk about, oh man, I remembered all the times I treated people bad. I
Right,
saw it from their point of view and it
right,
really affected me. And if I could only have a chance to do it again and make it
right,
better, that seemed like the most important thing at that moment for me for whatever reason. And then I was given a second chance. And so now that I have a second chance in life, now I want to make sure that I'm conscious of that and that every interaction I have is positive and upbuilding and never make those same mistakes again because I'm aware. Well, we can be aware now. We shouldn't have to have a near death experience to understand that,
right.
you know?
Scott, seriously, I mean, all jokes aside, that's one of the most profound things I've ever heard you say. And I do want to share something, and I bring this to an end right now. But boy, I used to work. I call him a boy. He's young dude, 21 years old, and I was like 35 years old at the time we were working together. And I was always like, there's only so much level of talk I'm gonna be able to have with this guy because he's just a young buck. You know what I mean? It's like, what would I have known at 21 years old? And after quite a few talks with this guy, I was like, dude, you really have your mind screwed on right, dude. Like, I'm so surprised to meet someone this mature at that age. I mean, it shocked me because I compared him to what I was at that age. And he said something that, man, I'm never going to forget. It's along the lines of what you've just said right now. But he said, you know what, Isaiah? He says, I try to be, I try to be in a continual dialogue with the 60-year-old version of myself who's going to have to live with the things I'm doing today on my conscience. And I was like, whoa, this guy might be, at that point, I was like, holy shit, this guy might be past me.
Mm,
Because I was like, damn, that's a really profound thing to understand that, like, hey, the person who I am today, first of all, I should be cringing about who I am right now in another 10 years, So to hold on very tightly to me being right now, or me having the best practices, if I look back to who I was, oh my God, when I came back here to South Korea 8 years ago, or who I was when I became a Christian 11 years ago, I'm nothing like that guy, because that guy wasn't even a father at that time when I became a Christian, and it certainly wasn't married. So, but that person has made a lot of fuck ups since becoming a Christian, since becoming a husband, since becoming a dad. I mean, I've made more mess ups, and I hope to God, and I hope one day, I mean, that would be the most amazing thing, man. Like, if there's a God out there and he gives us this opportunity to look at our lives and say, look, I'm not even going to judge you for this, but this is what you've done. This is the results of everything that happened as a result of your life. And you're going to get to see the totality of everything, all the ripples that went on to other people.
mm-hmm,
And you know what? Now I'm going to rewind this back. You get a chance to live this life out again. And now you're going to have to live knowing that the stuff you could be doing right now with saying something, or the way you've treated a woman, that could wind up trickling down to, her kids and their grandchildren. And we always think of ourselves being so like, separate little islands, but there's an interconnectedness of us all. And if I was God, if he makes me God on that day, that's exactly what I'm going to do. That's going to be everyone's judgment. It's like, you got to start all over again, and you're going to have knowledge of this. And that's going to that should inform the way you're treating people this go around. So,
mm-hmm. And another thing I'd like to suggest to people, because you know There's a lot of wise people in the world. A lot of older people that are wise. There's a lot of people.
Me? Hello?
Hello, hello. They need to do what we're doing and put videos out and sharing what they know. Even if you don't think you know a lot, please do the world a service. Share your wisdom. Share what it is you know, because there's a lot of people that stop themselves from doing that because they feel they have nothing to offer or they're not worthy enough to actually share these sort of things, right? And I would just encourage everybody, you know, help one another, teach the younger ones, help the younger people to know these things. If you have some life under your belt, if you have some wisdom that you can give it, because the world desperately needs
Mm,
it.
mm. Unless there is one caveat there. You probably didn't know what the caveat is. But that was, by the way, that was really good advice right there. You know what the caveat is?
What's that?
Unless they're atheist. In that
Yeah.
case, disown them,
Yeah.
kick them, kick them in the butt as they're leaving the house or wherever you see them. Slap them wherever you see them. Slap some sense into them. No, but
That's
seriously,
right.
Scott, all jokes aside, really, I really appreciate that last thought about the older people and the younger people. Because yeah, younger people need it. Man, I wish to God I could go back, man, 20, 25 years ago and have a heart to heart with the younger me
Hmm.
and kind of like tell that person to be at peace within, because the conflicts that I had with other people all started with an internal conflict of self-hatred, of self-denial. And man, if I would have come to terms and had peace within, I cannot imagine how many things I could have prevented myself and other hurts, and just a whirlwind of hurt that I've caused to other people. And I'm very grateful that I'm at this stage right now, but I'm looking forward to where I might be in the future if that continual growth projection continues. Because if I'm the same person now, 10 years from now, I'll just jump off a cliff, man. I don't want to continue to
Imagine, imagine that, in some aspects or some perspective, the younger you is here, and you have that opportunity every day to go share your
oh,
story, man. There's
oh,
younger people
oh,
all around you.
put chills on me, dude.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus, you put chills all over me, man.
There's
Oh, God.
people that,
Look at this. I'm not sure if you could see that. Ugh.
do you work in a school, right? Or
Ugh. Ugh. Sorry, you put heebie-jeebies all over me, man. Yeah, I know. I get
school?
that. I get that.
Yeah,
I get that.
if
Mm.
you work at a school or work around young kids or you're around the youth, you're talking to yourself, in some sense, because we're all one thing. We're all the same humanity, we're that same being, and we just need to talk to each other. Go back to your past life, talk to these
Yeah.
kids and help them see the light, man, if you can.
Yeah. And you know what? When I see my daughter now, I see a brand new chance to start all over. And I mean, I've thought about this because and this will be the last thing I say right here is that with my daughter, I've thought about how to share with her the kind of person that I was before, like I don't need to give her every detail, but I do want her to know that I was like a very, very broken person. And that wind up manifesting itself in a lot of different ways, especially with her mom, with her mother. And it's painful because on one side of it, my best duty I could try to do as a father is to avoid her from going down the same path that I went down, and to be like accepting of herself and understand the positive messaging that I've learned in my life. So there's that. And then there's the other side that like it pains me to know that the judgment that she might give me about a lot of stuff that I've done, like so I try to live a better day every day, try to be better. But um that whole idea about just trying to be a better version of yourself, because in my first book that I wrote, I I I I I wrote a line to her and I said, Leah, the truth, the true way to find happiness on this planet is to always strive to be the best version of yourself. but loving yourself every step of the way whenever you're not that person,
Hmm.
try to be the best, understand and forgive yourself, and to know that you're going to err, as a human. It is our nature to err. And I don't know, just last thoughts, just yeah, the last thoughts where we wrap up, because there's one more thing I want to say, but I do want to give the mic over to you before we.
Sure. Just my only advice is just think about what you want in life. Think about what's going to make a better community, what kind of world we want to live in, and let's be proactive. Let's all
Mhm.
do our part to be proactive, no matter what side you come on with this Carmelo Metcalf thing. I mean, let's see how we can unify despite that, despite what side you're on. What can we do to make this situation better? Use your thinking, use your imagination. Don't be spoon fed what you're told by those who profit off it. Think for yourself, think about what you want in life, and focus on that, and be a positive force, not only in your life, but everybody else's.
Mm.
That's my advice.
Very beautiful, coming from a godless atheist, by the way.
Hmm.
Nonetheless, no, so last thoughts, is that, first of all, the most amazing thing about our judicial system is that you are innocent until proven guilty. So let's everyone keep that in mind. Everyone deserves their day in court. Um, and then also don't make assumptions about what actually happened until you get all the details out there, because the media can be very deceptive as far as, releasing half truths at a time. So I learned in middle school something, one of my teachers, I'll never forget, that like half the truth is a lie. So, and it's often a great lie. So we have to be presented with everything in a situation. And if you talk to any person when there's a conflict, even take like Russia, Ukraine, Palestine, and Israel, you can talk to either of these sides, and both sides will unequivocally blame the other side 100% and take no responsibility for their actions. So, or just in like when there's divorces as well. So that's the reality, is that life is rarely ever that case that you just have someone who's completely right or completely wrong. And so truth is usually some kind of gray area in between there. So there's that. Try to see things from the other person's perspective. Like, let's say this Metcalf guy, he could have said, "Hey, you know, buddy, this is, you're in the wrong side, but why don't you just chill out here until till the rain passes or something, or can I get you a drink? You know, are you doing okay there? I know it's cold out there." He could have chosen to address the problem in a completely different manner and understand, hey, maybe this kid's just really cold. You know what I mean? Maybe he's getting rained on. Maybe if I was in his shoes, maybe I would want to go to someone else's tent. Um, I had an experience. I do want to share one quick, brief experience that I do want to relate back to this, because I went to Palestine. I walked into Palestine, from like, I walked down into there, and I walked into there, it started raining, and I ran over to this tarp, and I'm like, man, I'm just gonna wait till this rain passes. And a Palestinian guy, I see him start yelling at me like, oh, whatever, and I was like, oh fuck, this guy's gonna make me leave. I'm like, I'm gonna go get soaked down right there. And he came up to me and he's like, oh yeah, let me get you some tea.
Mm.
That was his response. And like, I totally assumed that he wanted me to leave. And he's like, he was basically saying that, let me get you some tea. And actually, just another funny story. I'm trying to wrap this up right now. But when I was leaving there, I was sitting down with some Palestinian people, and, we're drinking some tea and smoking something. I think it was hashish together with these guys. But one of these guys I see picks up an axe and starts walking behind me. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, I'm about to be featured on Al Jazeera right now, man. These guy's going to whack off my head. And I'm like, what was I even thinking, man? This guy raised up that axe and just started splitting wood right behind me and threw it into the fire and went back about what he was doing. And I was like, Oh my God, I feel like the most racist dude in the world, man. But um, no, it's a true story. But the thing is, though, you can get yourself in a situation like this. You could either make the worst assumption about, the situation, or as you're talking about, like trying to de-escalate it. This situation could have, in a parallel universe, these two boys could be best friends right now. You know what I mean? Like maybe even they did throw fists. Sometimes you become friends with people you fight.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes some of the closest relationships people wind up building starts off with conflict. Think about Rocky and Clever, no, not Clever Lane, Creed. They
Yeah.
start off enemies, and they ended up as best friends. And I know that's fiction, but these kind of things do happen in real life. I told you one story about me and the guy who, we were beefing online, and we wind up meeting out in person, and we got along just fine. But in another universe, these guys could have been, best friends,
Right.
and one person could have treated the other one with compassion, and that could have triggered a chain reactions where this person, just became a better version of himself. But unfortunately, the worst version played out, and so it is what it is. And so let's just try to learn a lesson from this, and
Yeah.
stop with the pointing fingers. And if we're going to point fingers, point them inward. So that's my last thoughts. And I do want to leave you with an outro. And Scott, thank you again, man. You always make amazing contributions, but today was especially poignant. So thank you for that. Please subscribe or share this with someone if you thought it was useful, and tell us what you thought about it. We'd really appreciate it. We're going to leave a few videos in the comment section. One is Scott videos that he made, and two is the positive messaging music that I'm making, because I really would like to see more people listening to it. It slaps harder than Will Smith, and it's got some good messaging too. So yeah, thanks again, and see you later.